Welcome to the EMA's Knowledge Series. On today's edition, a conversation with one of the EMA's Greenleaf Special Awardees for 2020, Rosemary Bernadette Detta Buch. Rosemary Bernadette Detta Buch grew up in Kenya, where she developed an innate love for wildlife that she naturally transposed to our twin islands. Detta, as she's known, has dedicated over 30 years to wildlife conservation and rehabilitation in Trinidad and Tobago. Her wildlife rehabilitation began with the fostering of an abandoned monkey in 1986. She continued her wildlife rescue and rehabilitation informally until 2001, when she formalized her efforts by establishing the Wildlife Orphanage and Rehabilitation Center, WORK, a non-profit wildlife conservation organization that relies on volunteers and donations to fund its work. Detta, through work, has built awareness of and promoted and encouraged the need for sustainability of our local wildlife through her provision of medical care, recuperation and rehabilitation, facilities to sick, injured, orphaned and dislocated wild animals. Her release of countless rehabilitated animals to their natural habitats has contributed to the health and continuity of these species and our biodiversity. Detta's work has also generated valuable biological, behavioral and clinical data, which is currently in the process of being digitized. Through her wealth of experience, Detta has and continues to serve as a mentor to many other wildlife rescuers and rehabilitators. Detta has served as president of the Council of Presidents of the Environment and has contributed as COPE's representative on various committees. Detta Buch, welcome to the EMA's Knowledge Series. We're happy to have you as our Greenleaf Special Awardee guest for today's edition. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Wendell, and thank you very much for having me. I mean, this was a real shock to me. When Pat McGraw phoned me, I refused to believe her. You don't do these sort of things for an award. You don't do it, in fact, you don't do it for recognition, except the recognition of the fact that it's necessary.
Great. Tell me of the early years as we go through the journey. This is really an opportunity for persons in society who may have heard the name, seen you active, but not understand where did this person come from and how long have they been doing what they're doing?
I think we have a responsibility. In just as, I mean, now people are realizing that we have a responsibility to, let's call it the earth, the environment. We're only now realizing it after all of these years. Ancient people knew we had that responsibility. Look at people, tribes that live in the forests and the Amazon and so on. These people are aware of how they're dependent on the environment. But we have just, since the Industrial Revolution, we've simply discounted the environment and our need to look after it, really care for it. And then we haven't established even the laws that are not in place to properly manage it.
What would you say was your first sort of eye-opener, game changer, the moment that you decided, that's it, I have to make a difference?
I think I've grown up taking care of wild animals. My mother was a nurse, and when we went, for my father, it was going back to Kenya. My mother was, what we didn't know, my mother was actually Irish. And I grew up disliking the Irish because most of the nuns in school were Irish. So anyway, then we discovered, I was about 50 when I discovered that my mother was actually Irish. But bless her heart, she was a very dedicated person. And we were farming at one time. And, you know, even when we moved into the town or the suburbs, we always had something in the house that was sick or injured. The guinea fowl, in fact, when we eventually, my father's job sent him to Mombasa, we took the guinea fowl with us.
Yes.
So the guinea fowl lived in a pen at the back of the, you know, we always had something. And then throughout my years, I was 10 years in Jamaica before I came to Trinidad. And it was little hummingbirds. There was a wonderful lady who lived somewhere on the North Coast, and from time to time I used to phone her. I've got a such and such. This is what's happened to it. What do you recommend I do? So she would give me advice from over there, and she was an elderly person, but she'd been doing this all her life. So I felt that I wasn't alone, even though it was a weird thing to be doing. You know, your friends thought she's a nice person, but she's a little strange. So it was something I'd been doing all for so many years. So it was not like a sudden awakening. The eye-opener actually, in that it was actually a professional work, came much, much later. I mean, even when I was in college, I had animals we were not permitted to have anything in our rooms except the one person, and mine was always full of all sorts of strange things. So we'd have people on the corridor who would be looking out for me in case the warden came doing a sort of
rounds.
But her rounds. About 1997, I'd spent some time with my son and his wife, your friend. And Kristen said to me, I know somebody you should meet. And she took me to the museum the Museum of Science in Miami. And I met a man called Brian Neely. At that time, he was director of the museum, and he had a rehab for owls. Actually, it was specifically owls. And my daughter-in-law told him all about what I was doing, and this sort of thing. And he said, "Oh, I think you should join the FWRA." What's that? Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. You mean there's a formal organization? And this was the eye opener for me, because it obviously makes sense. There were a lot of people who had been doing this like I had been doing, without a background, without a specific, because it's a medical background that one needs to some extent. Like most of these people I found, the people who were licensed, and this was the other thing, it's all, there's a legal framework for it. And people who had a license were usually vet techs. So here it was that veterinary teaching hospitals had a program for obviously veterinary technicians, and it was people with veterinary technician background. And I went, he recommended I come to the conference that year, so I did. My son helped me, and that was the only time that anybody had to help me with the money to get there. After that, I just wrote around for sponsorship, and firms have been amazing. Many turned out big public companies had been very generous, and
yes.
every conference I went to, every year after that, somebody paid all or part. Sometimes it was just the fees, because once you get there, the conference were held in kind of remote places, and one needed to rent a car as well. So you had car and you had the fees of the conference fees, which were always subsidized, so they were not a fortune. But the amount that I learned from those conferences was enormous, because it was a teaching exercise from morning until evening. And they would shoot some of the evening sessions were usually hands-on sessions where you learned to do figure 8 bandages, or you learned to give different kinds of injections, or talking about the injections, there were very strict rules. Mm-hmm. There's the red line, what you can do and what you can't do, what is really the province of a trained veterinary surgeon or veterinarian, and what you can do as nurse or tech.
Yes.
But it also showed from the organization of the rehabs in Florida, likewise throughout America. And they have minimum standards and codes of practice. So I think this is something that's very necessary. And it's the one thing that I tried at one time. I did get a lot of support years ago, back in, I think, 2005, 6, because we had somebody here who actually I had known when I was a young woman, Professor John Cooper.
Yes.
He tried as well. So we tried two things. We were looking at trying to establish code of practice, and we were looking at also a space, because I was working out of my backyard, which is nice and what, but it's in an urban setting, and it's in an urban community. Nothing we were doing there was going to impact negatively on the environment, because obviously things don't come in. One wouldn't take in something, you wouldn't take in a bat with rabies, for example.
Yes. Yes.
But so it was not that there was anything that would have been zoonotic and affect the neighbors. There was nothing, animals that are injured and damaged like that and that are in recovery don't make a lot of noise. So you're not going to hear very noisy things. In fact, there's no more noise these days from the crowds of parrots that live in our hillside and swarm across and invade my backyard because of the fruit. But, you know, it would have been far more appropriate to have it positioned in a more public, more appropriate space. And the space I was looking at, of course, was part of the property of the Mount Hope, the vet school,
Yes.
and their agricultural parcel of land up there. That was eventually turned down. So after John left, there was no more support, and then Dr. Harewood he was that principal at the time, and he was very interested and supportive. But after that, things changed for whatever reason. They must have had their reasons. But it's been up till now. Now, I mean, there are a number of people who have set up independent rehabs. There is no code of practice to manage what is being done, and there is nothing under the law. So these people are all working out of either they use the same standards that I was using, which is what I'd recommended to many of them, or they're just doing this out of with their own integrity. But there is need for legislation, because this can be abused.
Yeah.
People make zoological collections of wildlife, which is not appropriate. We need our wildlife out there. We're here to manage it.
With the establishment of work, the Wildlife Orphanage and Rehabilitation Center, did you feel that you had gotten closer, per se, to where your passion lay, what you really wanted to do, where wildlife was concerned? And I have to say, was Trinidad and Tobago even receptive to the work of the orphanage?
To answer the first part of your question, when I was a little girl, by the time I was about 8 or 9, I used to, where we lived when we moved into the rural part of outside of Nairobi, I could look across way in the distance, and on a little red ridge of hills, there were some small buildings that you could see. And I used to tell everybody, I'm going over there, that's where I'm going to school. I'm going to be a vet. So my mother was, of course, by the time my mother realized that I was serious about this, oh, no, not at all. You can't have daughters, doing things like that. So they sent me to England to a finishing school. But yes. That was my passion in the first place. I loved animals, and I loved taking care of them and making things better. But there was something amazing about taking in something which is injured and fragile and can no longer attack you or anything else. And even the ones that could now are too badly injured to try. And getting that well again and being able to put it out, to come back to it. There have been lots of help along the way, and there's been quite a change of attitude since I first, the odd things that we were doing when I first started off. It was a red howler monkey at one time, and then it was the pet trade, the wildlife trade, somebody had brought in, amongst other things, a giant otter, and they're not native to Trinidad. And this one, somebody who normally hunts, the man had been, somehow came across this fellow who was selling this giant otter. And the otter was in an oil drum. So a young giant otter in an oil drum, and it was sick. So he wanted to take it because he said, well, you can't sell that, it's sick. The fellow demanded money, so the man gave him the money and brought it straight up. That came to me. And I had to get this thing better. I had it in the house because there was I didn't have the facilities outside. And eventually the otter, as it got bigger and it was now well, where to put it? I thought, well, can you get it back to, well, we didn't know where it came from. So it eventually decided to take over my bed. It didn't like sleeping out on its own. It wanted to sleep in my bed, but it didn't want to sleep with company. So, it became important to get rid of it. So that went to the zoo. And that was the giant otter that they had in the zoo for all those years. And then, of course, when I eventually got my own property, it was to try and build something here. And that was another interesting situation. Joe Singh became regional director for I4. And I had written, by chance, I had written to I4 earlier in the year asking if they would support me. And I didn't hear a response. I got no response from them. So when I saw Joe turn up at the COPE meeting, Council of Presidents, I accosted him and said, listen to me, boy, you're a Trini, and this is what, and I want so-and-so. So he looked a little embarrassed, poor fellow. And he said, well, I'll see what I can do. And I just laughed because I said, oh, it's okay. I'm just giving you a bad time. About 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a call from somebody, Kate Natras, in not Bahamas, but one of the islands up the way. And it was to St. Kitts. It was to join a conference that they were having, an I4 conference that they were having, and I was being invited. And that was lovely. So it was a very interesting conference. They were looking at environment and, climate change and all the rest of it way back then. And sometime during one of the days during the conference, she came to me with an envelope. She said, I hope this will do it for you. So with that, I was able to build the infrastructure I needed, 2 big flight cages, a hospital, and equip it with proper hospital cages. And from every year that I went to the FWRA conferences, I came back with a suitcase full of, I'd take so little clothes that it was just the minimum, change of shirt and change of underwear. And everything else, the space was for all the stuff that I would pick up over there, from everything from hemostats and syringes to, bigger equipment and heating pads and all sorts of things. So literally every year I equipped what I needed out there through the I4, because through the FWRA, because at these conferences, hospitals, when a hospital apparently in the States, or maybe it doesn't do that now with the different economic situation, but anything they put out for a surgery, if it's not used, including instruments, they put certain instruments out for surgery and it's not used, they have to dump them. So it's just swept into huge garbage bags. And those bags, the wildlife rehabilitation centers within reach of that hospital, these things are usually given to them. So they just keep them. And it keeps these places going. So, it's a lot of money that way.
Now, you mentioned the Council of Presidents for the Environment. Of course, you served in the organization. You were at the helm of the organization at a specific period. And my question is really, organizations with people who are passionate and dedicated versus the rest of society?
I think everybody has to be involved. You can't do this on your own for a start. And then it's a whole change of attitude. I think we've been so blessed over the last 70, 80 years, since World War II. Look at how societies have prospered. And that same prosperity, down generations of that prosperity, made people indifferent to reality, that somebody had to create this, somebody had to work at it to make it. And we've just accepted the largesse that we have. It's nice to live with this, go out and fet. And in the meantime, there's an awful lot of things going wrong and nobody seems to notice. And when they do, then it's, we can't do anything about it. I mean, the climate change conference, I was very disappointed in the kind of way it all got brushed off, and we haven't made the commitments that we might have liked to have seen. So it is something that everybody is our collective responsibility. I think environment is a collective responsibility. We collectively inherit the environment. We all use it. We all breathe the same air.
Where is our real predicament when it comes to wildlife and sensitive?
I think the real predicament is that we don't have the legislation to support our wildlife, really. The legislation we have is out of date. Everything from forestry to wildlife. The forestry legislation really looks at commercial forests, commercial forestry. And likewise, I think the Wildlife Act looks at hunting more than protection of species. So yeah, they've made addition, they've added things and taken things off, but look at, you talked about extinction, songbirds. We still have the songbirds, what do they call themselves? The Cage Birds Association. And you'll see a man walking down the road with a little little bamboo cage and a little black bird sitting inside. Those are all males because it's the males that sing. They have trapped them to extinction. So many of them, the pickerplats, we still have some pickerplats. Mostly I found some recently, not too far away from here. But many of the other songbirds have become extinct in Trinidad, and they're bringing them in now from the mainland. If you continue to take only the males, because the males sing, so you take all the males you can find, you go on trapping the males, what happens? Many times I've spoken to these people whenever I met one and say, well, why don't you breed them if you want them to stay? Why don't you breed them? Well, it's too difficult. They have very special needs, it's too difficult. So there are so many things that are like that. I saw a brocket deer some time ago in Shagaramas, well, quite a while ago. And then this is the sort of thing that happens. Our wildlife is under threat from human expansion, really. Human populations taking over more and more space, less and less space. There are no proper corridors between one place and the other, which is something that turned up years ago when I was studying red howler monkeys. And you realize that in the past, historically, the red howlers foraged in the south of Trinidad at one part of the year, and they followed, the fennefays of the forest northwards and southwards with whatever was fruiting, because things fruit and bloom at different times of the year, north and south. And the monkeys followed the fennefays of the forest. And now they are isolated into little pockets, Shagaramas, 2 colonies. This part of the northern range, maybe 1 or 2 colonies. Somewhere down near Point Comana, down there, down further east. There are odd ones seen here and there. So in this way, we're causing extinction. But it's happening kind of, if I can say, naturally because of human expansion, the need for land. So there's a need for proper management of the resource. I think we talked about people complaining bats. Bats
Yes.
are many. Bats, so you're going to exterminate bats. Wherever you can find bats, you exterminate bats. In the urban areas, the bats are a danger. They carry disease. Well, they don't carry disease. Oh, they carry rabies. No, there's only one particular bat that carries rabies, and that one is very strictly controlled in a limited number of caves, and they're monitored. And once the number of animals becomes too large, they're gassed, bring down the numbers. For the rest of them, they're the pollinators of all our wild trees. So without the bats, you'd have no. I've got a wild châtaigne tree out there. It's not châtaigne, it's a wonderful native tree. That's pollinated by bats. And so many of our native trees. So these things are useful, and we don't have the right. We don't have the right to eliminate things or
Yes.
to allow extinction to happen. I remember traveling with my father, and he used to say, when I was a boy, we'd be going through some savannah somewhere, and we'd stop because he'd suddenly see a herd of Congoni or something, and he would stop and he'd say, look at that. When I was a boy, when I was a kid, there were thousands of them, and now you'd see a herd of about 25 or 50 at the most. And
Yes.
I realized from those years, how much we've lost or we're losing by expanding populations and by not taking the proper legislation.
Were you to pass the baton today, are there persons with the dedication, the passion, even the interest?
I think there are. And I think during my years of doing this, especially towards the end, my log is just full of, today Mrs. So-and-so phoned me something. Today I got a call from such and such. Today so-and-so. And this is day by day by day. It was probably 1 or 2 calls per day. And then maybe it was 3 calls. But that is quite a lot from odd people in different parts of the country who you've never seen or heard of before. Or they talk to some forestry, or they talk to somebody and they told them they gave me your name. So these are people who cared enough, ordinary folks who cared enough to ask somebody and to find, eventually get to my name and then give me a call. And this, I realized this had happened up to the time COVID hit. It was heartening to find that more and more people were that aware. So yes. I think there was a greater awareness, or there is perhaps a greater awareness. As to children, I had done talks in schools from time to time. Some of them had very funny outcomes, but I found children with lots of questions and always with comments. I did so and so, and we found such and such, and there would be some little family story of some little bird that they'd found and fixed it up. So I think people are more aware, and I think now after all the news on the COP26 and global warming, I think people are going to become even more concerned and more aware of the need. So it's a need for protection, but it's also, going back to the first point about rehab, it's a need to properly train people.
Yes.
And to have people properly equipped to be able to carry out the thing. Because if you bring in an animal and somebody doesn't know how to treat it and what to do for it, and then it dies. Now, I've made many mistakes along the way, and you do. You make mistakes. Sometimes it's because you were in a rush, or you did something and you didn't know any better, and that happens, and something will not make it. But I think there are more people who are involved. And it's just a matter now of setting up the infrastructure.
Which wildlife species or animal that might have been injured or harmed in some way that you had to care for that brought you the most joy?
Actually, one of the things I've learned that's been very profound is that almost all animals are intelligent. Now,
Yes.
when you talk about intelligence, you think of other humans, or think of things that can, but animals figure things out in their own particular way. And yes, I've had many very funny stories of, and some of the most endearing, I think, was a pair of, guess what, Cobos. And actually, Barbie Jardine took over an earlier Corbeau, and you've probably heard of Barbie's Corbeau, Gromit,
Yes.
who became quite famous. And he used to follow her downtown. When she'd drive off, he'd follow and sit on top of the car while wait for her while she did whatever she did, come home. But I had two Corbeau babies which I raised. I can't remember how they came in, but when those were ready, I found that they were, as they to begin with, they were very afraid of me and very reticent and shy and so on. And I kept them loose. They had a place to sleep at night, and they came in and they slept in their little place, and they foraged around all morning. They stayed together and they did things together. And eventually, as soon as they saw me, they'd come running looking for me. And as they grew up, they got more like children, actually. And they used to play games. They loved toys. They used to play football. They they loved my shoelaces. And at a time then when I was having back problems and I was wearing good solid washicongs, and they discovered how to untie the laces, and they realized if you took the one little thing at the end, and pulled it, continued to pull it, it would undo the whole lot. And they thought this was big fun. And now there were two laces, so the two of them could have a dance around your foot and jump all over the place, holding on to this lace. And then you'd have to join in, you'd have to lift your foot, and you'd have to put it down, and you'd have to try and move it. And this was a huge game. And it was consciously a game. It was not just something it was a conscious game. And when I eventually released them, it was up on in Shagaramas on top of the hill by the top of the tower up there. And
Yes.
I had to go up there every day, and I used to spend hours up there because they wanted me to be there. They were kind of worried about the environment. And eventually, a young Corbeau who was probably must have been orphaned, lost its mother, became friends with them. So he started joining in all their activities. So there was this one, again, this sort of companionship, and he watched what they were doing, and that was okay. So this person can't be as bad as they thought they were, joined in all the fun. The little boy, there was a girl and a boy, and one day I had left. They'd never traveled in the car. When they traveled up there, it was in a huge cage on the trunk of a big pickup.
Yes.
And this particular day, I left the back door of the car open. I had a big water thing, that I'd fill their water with and so on. I left it open. And while I was sitting there with the other two, suddenly the one is missing. This boy has disappeared. So I go looking for him, can't see him anywhere. And then I moved to take some of the stuff back to put it in the car. And I found he was sitting on the back seat of the car, waiting to go home. Take me home. And there was a look on their face when you had to take him out and put him down with the others. Then eventually, of course, they learned to fly up to the top of the dish. And then, of course, look what I can do, I'm on the dish.
This is always an opportunity for our guests to really impact on those who are viewing, those who are listening now and in the future. why the environment is so important to the human race,
Yes.
to a society, to an island people, and what we ought not to take for granted, even in 2021 with technology and industry, etc. So I give you the opportunity to really impart your wisdom to society.
Wendell, I think this is a very small island. And if we're to consider ourselves part of the Caribbean, which we're probably not, we're really part of South America. If we were to consider ourselves part of the Caribbean, we have the richest biodiversity in the entire Caribbean. We've got animals and plants here, which are really mainland species or subspecies, an evolution from mainland species. It's an extremely rich biodiversity, and it's ours to protect, not to exploit, but to protect. It's necessary. It's necessary when we look out at a tree. It's not just something that's growing, it's a nuisance, it's in the way. That's our oxygen. We forget the trees breathe out oxygen, breathe in the carbon. The birds and everything, the insects and whatever else, everything has a place. It has a particular place in the scheme of things, in maintaining the balance. Land is fertile because leaf litter and tree litter. The reason the forest is very fertile, the soil is fertile. Leaf litter is what fertilizes the soil. You take away the forest, like they're doing in Brazil, and you end up with maybe 2 years of good crops on that soil, and then the soil is depleted. We need to manage more. I think we probably, I don't know what is taught in schools these days. I haven't really looked at syllabi, but we need to be teaching in schools the need to protect our environment. That I know is a problem because it means that with the expanding human populations, where do you put them all?
Yes.
Do we have to get used to living in more confined space? Maybe it's to be living in confined space and create bigger recreation spaces. But whatever, we inherited it. It's extremely rich, and we need to manage it carefully, because in managing it carefully, we're managing our own environment. Money is not just what we're making from oil or gas or some industry that we create. It's also in the health of people. I mean, our own health will suffer as the environment deteriorates. People with health issues, even now at the moment, most of us are coughing with the amount of Sahara dust seems to have increased immensely. And we're getting, everywhere I go, there's loads of dust on every shelf, on every book, and every surface. This is destroying our own health. We're all suffering from nasal problems and chest problems and whatever. So our environment, trees, are a way of protecting us from all of that. Care for it, manage it, but we need the legislation to be able to manage it properly. We need people trained to manage it. And I think there are deficiencies in all of those areas. I think many more people are aware of their responsibilities these days than they have been in the past. But it hasn't got down all the way down. There's a trickle down that's needed, and there are gaps in that. So it's probably better education.
Thank you for sharing your insight, but also thank you for sharing your tremendous experience with nature. And thank you for your contribution, the contribution over more than 3 decades, for all the time that you have given. The EMA's Greenleaf Special Award is small in size, but at the end of the day, it's immense for the organization's appreciation of those who have labored long before and continue to share their best knowledge with our society. So congrats and thank you for the chat today.
Thank you, Wendell. Thank you for having me. Thank you for I hope I've answered some of the questions.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Wendell. Thank you, EMA.
Thank you for viewing this edition of the EMA's Knowledge Series, a conversation with one of the EMA's Greenleaf Special Awardees for 2020, Rosemary Bernadette Detta Buch. This has been a production of the Environmental Management Authority.
The iCare Corporate Recycling Program. Testimonials from some of our partners.
I am Sherry Kali, and I am the Human Resource Manager for Non-Destructive Testers. We are committed to the prevention of pollution through the use of processes, practices, materials, and products that avoid, reduce, or control pollution. This initiative by iCare made it possible as it clearly outlined a 10-step plan for implementation of office recycling, which tremendously assisted and detailed in aligning the implementation of this initiative to its overall goals and objectives as it pertains to the company's environmental policy.
Key steps in iCare's recycling plan: establishing a sustainability team, labeling and positioning recycling bins next to waste receptacles, installing recycling signage, and implementing a communication strategy to encourage staff participation.
I am Travis Geyer, HSE Rep for Trinidad Systems Limited. iCare was able to assist in re-educating exercises by highlighting the positives of recycling. And as a technology provider, the iCare recycling program ties in with our e-waste management program. At TSL, we do have a declaration to adhere to the HSE requirements of our clients. This has proven successful as an essential part in preserving valued partnerships. The guided layout, which includes the 5 W's of implementing an in-office recycling program, offers a greater relationship in the partnership between the TSL Group and iCare.
The 5 W's are essential in helping our corporate partners appreciate why it's important to adopt a green policy inclusive of recycling. Who are the key internal and external actors to engage? What recyclables are collected by the project? How iCare supports the internal setup of recycling systems? And where to deposit collected recyclables.
My name is Alicia Denny, and I'm a lab tech here at the Institute of Marine Affairs and a proud Green Team member at IMA. The iCare program was started in 2016. We thrive to create safe environmental practices here at IMA. We basically started off with trying to foster the 3 basic R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. And the iCare program really helped establish that in a workspace, made it more accessible. It's a multidisciplinary institute, so we do a broad range of scientific research, and as such we're fully aware of the impacts that solid waste and other type of maybe chemical waste would have on the environment. So it's in our mission and vision to prevent such or mitigate such pollution. So of course we will try and implement certain programs that will be beneficial to achieving this task, and the iCare program was one of them. Adopting the iCare system here at IMA has allowed us to fulfill our obligations to the green policy, and we got a lot of support from our line ministry, board of governors, and of course the senior members here at the IMA. It has allowed us to become examples for other organizations, and we're very proud of that.
We invite corporate TNT to be our partners in environmental sustainability. Take the voluntary step to implement in-house recycling with our support and share iCare's message of recycling and environmental conservation. We look forward to having you on board.